So welcome everyone to the AESQ AS13100 Virtual Supplier Forum. We have over 250 individuals registered today from 25 countries participating. We are recording today's supplier forum, and we will provide a link to that video recording following this session. We will take questions using the chat feature today. So if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat feature and we will address those towards the end of today's supplier forum. We do ask that if you're not speaking to please remain on mute during the presentation. And as I said, we are going to do some Q&A today using the chat feature. Jim Wilson from Pratt & Whitney will be moderating our chat session later today. And we do have a couple of polls taking place throughout today's supplier forum. There is one open now if you want to go ahead and start answering that. You should be able to see a poll that says, what city are you calling in from today? And we'll take a look at those answers in a few minutes. So the AESQ supplier forums are typically held twice a year. They normally rotate face-to-face between North America, Europe, and Asia. However, for the last few sessions, we've been doing them virtually, and we've actually been reaching a broader audience. So we thank everyone for joining us today. These supplier forums provide a great opportunity to learn about updates on the work of the AESQ, to share best practices, provide feedback to the AESQ, and really develop a network of practitioners and subject matter experts. So this supplier forum is focused on AS13100 deployment, which is supported by 13 reference manuals, and we'll get into a lot more details about all of these things later today. We have a packed agenda for you, starting out with the AESQ overview, vision, and objectives presented by Emmanuel Vivier from Safran Aircraft Engines. Then we have the AS13100 standard overview from Earl Capozzi of Pratt & Whitney. The deployment introductions and milestones from Elizabeth Pace at Pratt & Whitney. Deployment plans from IHI, Mr. Hiroshi Yamamoto. From MTU, Michael Mrosuski. From Safran Aircraft Engines, Catherine Katarina Graca. Pratt & Whitney, presented by Greg Hyatt. And then we're doing a deployment dashboard from Elizabeth Pace, Pratt & Whitney, followed by a 15-minute break, so we'll all have time to get up and get a cup of coffee. Then we'll follow that with deployment survey results presented by Jim Wilson of Pratt & Whitney and Elizabeth Pace of Raytheon Technologies. We will focus on APQP deployment from Carl Evans at Rolls-Royce, followed by approach and advancement towards AS13100 from Mani Rathanam Rajamani at Tata Advanced Systems. AESQ's How to Get Involved from Jun Sakai at IHI. Then we will have a question and answer session. Jim Wilson from Pratt & Whitney will be moderating that session. And Uzam Khan from Rolls-Royce will provide a summary and close of today's session. So that's a very busy agenda for us. Again, if you have questions today, please type them into the chat feature, and we will manage those as we get towards the end of today's session. So there is a poll question that is open right now. What city are you calling in from today? So we'll give a few more seconds there so people can type in their answers to the poll. This is just to kind of get us started, make sure everyone can see the poll question.
Becky, I don't see where we can answer, actually.
I think it just shut itself down. I'm going to share the results.
Yeah, no one was able to answer.
No one was able to answer.
No, there was no field to type into.
Okay, it said short answer, so that was a good test anyway. we'll see what happens with the next poll. We did test this and it worked during the test, so thank you for that. So I'm going to pass this over to Emmanuel Vivier to do the AESQ Aero Engine Supplier Quality Group Overview. So Emmanuel.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Becky. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So can go to the first chart. Yeah, so just to start with, the idea is really to explain when we start this journey and why we start this journey. So actually, we just have to go back in 2013. And 2013, our global world and environment was changing very quickly, and specifically for all the aerospace engines industry, it was we were facing a lot of movement. So the airline passengers set to double in size over all the next 20 years, and we are already facing that. The customer expectation was growing very fast as well. We had an increasing level of a supplier that was involved in the global supply chain. Our global supplier footprint was changing as well very quickly, and maybe 20 to 30 years ago, a lot of our own suppliers were very close to our facilities, and I used to work with each of us, of the OEMs, and it was changing very rapidly. In the same time, a large number of common suppliers set their place between all the engine manufacturers, and the diversity from these suppliers was also increasing. We had very small companies with some between 20 and 30 people, and to very large business companies with turnover over than $2 billion. And in all these same times, we have to improve the quality, the cost, and the delivery remains a key challenge. So that already set the need for change, and that created why we had this industry burning platform to change the way we were working between the big manufacturers and the suppliers, and how we could improve all together this quality, this cost, and the delivery with a better collaboration. And that's where, so in 2013, we decided to start with AESQ, using the example from what has been done on the automotive industry a couple of years ago with the QS 9000 with Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, who is really the model we got the inspiration to create the AESQ. Next. So now just a small video to introduce you what we are achieving through the AESQ, and this video is available on the website.
Today, more than 3 billion passengers travel by air every year, and this is set to double over the next 20 years. These air passengers trust us with their lives. Naturally, our customers expect us to deliver defect-free products and services every single time. After all, that's our promise. But how do we guarantee zero defects when we know that inspection can never be 100% effective at sorting the good from the bad? The answer is to avoid producing defects in the first place. To this end, defect prevention activities are built into our advanced product quality planning and process control requirements as an end-to-end process, with each step being integral to defect-free production. Here's how it works. Firstly, we have product quality planning. This is where the design team works directly with the customer to understand what the product needs to do. From this, a product design can be created. Cross-functional teams then carry out design risk analysis to ensure that potential design risks are identified, understood, and mitigated. There are a number of ways this might be carried out. For example, by using a design failure mode and effects analysis tool. Next, the team designs and develops a capable manufacturing process to make the product. Any risk of this process bringing about non-conformance is evaluated using a process Pfmea, and any such risks are mitigated to ensure that the manufacturing or assembly process will produce defect-free products. The appropriate levels of defect prevention controls are defined using the relevant information. For high-severity risks, we must strive for mistake proofing, while we can address other risks through statistical process control, inspection, or audit. All this is captured in the control plan. We then ensure the capability of the measurement and visual inspection methods required by the control plan. Once verified, we can start to measure the capability of the process to ensure it makes defect-free parts. The Delegated Product Release Verification Program provides a common standard for inspector competency and qualifications. Once in production, the role of manufacturing and assembly is not just to maintain the initial capability level, but to continually improve it to ensure customer and business targets are met. Moreover, data from our processes and inspection must be used to control the process by allowing us to take action before defects are made. If things do go wrong, our problem-solving process must identify and eliminate the root cause so that it cannot happen again. Furthermore, learning from the investigation needs to be fed back into the Pfmea, enabling it to be captured and shared. The Aero Engine Supplier Quality Group standards have been created to provide clear requirements on how these defect prevention tools are to be effectively deployed. There is a clear expectation that each of us will deploy these requirements and cascade them down through our supply chain. The final stage of our defect prevention process is an effective audit of the quality system, manufacturing processes, products, and special processes. This review reinforces compliance and can identify further opportunities for improvement. Of course, to be effective, all these tools rely on good cross-functional working and leadership that creates an environment intolerant of non-conformance. After all, defect prevention is a key route to achieving our promise of defect-free products and services. AESQ, raising the standard for quality.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Becky, for this video. So as you can see, this is very explicit, and as I said just before, you can go directly to the AESQ website if you want to see it again and to spread it around you. So what I will just add to this very explicit video is that we see that AESQ developed a lot of standards and a lot of tools for each of this for these all cycles of our product. And what is key to keep in mind is that all these tools has to work as a whole system. So this is one of the big points for these tools. Next. So now we saw very quickly why we started the AESQ, what the AESQ was doing. So now maybe just focus on what is the purpose of all this. So very pragmatically, the purpose, we have a couple of bullets to summarize that. The first is to simplify and standardize all the Aero engine supplier requirements through the removal of the duplication and waste. Second is to create a common language for the quality. Then we have to build on existing industry standards where they exist. So the idea is not to reinvent everything, is really to get the inspiration and to keep all the best practices everywhere, to select them, and then to create these requirements that will be the most simple as possible, prospective, and also auditable to make sure that everything are going on the right path. Then to promote the use of the standardized third-party training as well, to deliver results with the pace, of course. So this is a final goal, and to focus on to focus on the effective deployment and the improving the capability of the shared supply chains. So the idea is really to achieve all that, and this is really the goal of the AESQ. Next. So this is just for your interest. It's a summary of who is the AESQ, who is behind the AESQ name. And so, as you can see, we are 10 major companies that are voting members, so that are the board of the AESQ. Most of them were there at the very beginning of the AESQ, and we have a couple of AESQ members who are not voting, but they are very invested as well, and you can also read their names. And I think we will explain you later for the major ones who want to be more active. And there will be a presentation on that, how you could get involved as well in our works. Next. Okay, this is just again for your information, but it's just the name and the ladies and the guys who are behind the name of the companies. Next, please. Okay, so now what is the AESQ vision? Well, just in a short sentence, or maybe not so short, but in a sentence too. So it's to establish and maintain a common set of quality requirements that enable the global aero engine supply chain to be truly competitive through the lean, capable processes and a culture of continuous improvement. So this is very addressing the global aero engine supply chain. This is key. Next, please. Okay, this is also to illustrate where we started the journey. So a couple of years ago, so in 2012, this was the landscape of the global industry, our industry requirements flow down. So you can see that there was and there still are for most of them. Of course, the regulatory requirements, the customer requirements, the global industry requirements with the NatCap, the AEQG, ISO, and so on. Everything are flowing down in the aero engine manufacturers, and each of the major engine manufacturers also created or actually set up their specific requirement expectation as well. And all that were flowing down to the aero engine supply chain, so we can easily understand that from a supplier who is working for both Rolls-Royce, Safran, Pratt, or GE, they could have a very complex set of requirements to apply and to audit and so on. So very tough environment, which is not necessarily compatible with the goal we are trying to achieve. So next, please. So this one, I will not enter into all the details, but this one was just to recap the main standards that were produced by the AESQ from the very beginning. So you can see all the AS113 and 01, 02, 03, and so on, which were describing all the tools that were presented in the video. So this was the first step for the journey. And as we just saw, considering the point where we started, it was necessary to pass through this step for this journey, to start to converge, to collaborate, to select all the best practices, to organize them, and so on. But again, it was the first step, and now we will enter into the next step, which is the AS13100. We will cover all that, and this will be described just later. Next, please. So just a last chart to show you a couple of examples. The idea is really to remind the fact that during all this journey, the job was not just performed in office with a couple of people. It was a big community that was collaborating, and it was done, and it's still done actually currently, with lots of suppliers, lots of manufacturers, and so on. And we have every day we have new illustration of the success the application of these standards and these tools, and all the benefits it brings to our global supply chain and our global industry. So these are just a couple of examples, but we have many and many others that could be presented, and yet today we will present you a couple of other examples. Next, please. Okay, so now I just explained all this, where we come from, what we are trying to achieve through the AESQ. So I will just let the ball to Earl Capozzi from Pratt and Whitney. We will give you the overview for the AS13100.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Earl Capozzi. Next slide, please. So to carry on what you've heard, what we've been working on is AS13100. So what that does is allow the aero engine manufacturers to really shrink the requirements and really call out AS13100 and all have the same requirements. So that's what we've done. You know, in the past, the slides that you previously saw, you saw AS13000X, right? There was 5 different specs, and now they're all rolled up in the AS13100. Slide. So, like I said, in the past, you know, Safran has Sabre, Rolls has, you know, their standard. We have ASQ R01 and so on and so forth, right? We're rolling all of those into, reducing those and rolling them into AS13100, right? So we're actually reducing a lot of the requirements up to 50%. And with that said, when we roll out, and some of us have already done that, our new Rolls-Royce's Sabre, GE's S1000, Pratt's ASQ R01, those documents will greatly be reduced, but the language will all be aligned to AS13100. And then we also created guidance material. Sometimes we call those the gold books or reference material, but they're a great resource to be successful, right? So there's case studies in there that'll show you what you need to do to meet AS13100. And a lot of energy went into creating those, and we're very proud of those. And we really think it'll be a very big enabler for AS13100. And you're going to hear this probably a couple of times, but those are available to you for free. So you can grab the reference materials off the AESQ webpage, and they will help you be able to meet AS13100 with a very specific aero engine case studies. You know, in the past, some of the other standards we rolled out, there was material that was available, but it wasn't really engine focused, right? So we see this as a big win and a big enabler. And like I said, the overall requirements are reduced by 50%. And there's also some new asks, right? Our goal is to make your life easier, but also raise the bar. So, you know, we've incorporated human factors. We'll talk about how we changed the audit structure a little bit to help empower you more to be successful. So more to come on that. Next slide. So the structure of AS13100, Chapter A aligns to 9100D. So the clause numbers in 9100D, you'll see that if there's an additional ask in AS13100, the clause numbers will align. So the structure is lined up with 9100, and then in Chapter B, 9145. And then Chapter C are all the tools you need to be successful for Chapter B and Chapter A. But they're aligned to the clauses in the IQG 9100 standards. And we think this is a big enabler too, and will also help clarify, right? Because sometimes you had to hop around and try to figure out where the clause aligned to the standard, right? So, and a lot of us are aligning our specific requirements the same way, right? So I can speak for Pratt because that's where I work. We're aligning our ASQR1 clauses to align to AS13100, which in turn aligns to 9100. So that'll make your life easier, right? And then you can see the example there. So if you went to 9100 and looked at 9.3 management review, you can see where we added 9.3.2.1. There's some additional language around or shalls for cost support quality, manufacturing and assembly, and customer scorecards. And then once again, human factors will be incorporated through the whole document. And right now that's driven through YASA, but it's taking hold by all the regulatory agencies, and it's the right thing to do. More to come on that. Next slide. So in the past, like I said, each of us had our own requirements. So we would take 9100, 9145, and each OEM would make it their own, right? We would add our additional requirements. So you had a pretty girthy Rolls-Royce Sabre, GS 1000, Pratt's ASQR1, and Safran Safe document that would have additional language. So what we did now is we aligned around AS 13100 with the end goal of greatly reducing the language in our OEM documents, right? So that makes your life easier because you have one document to work to, and you don't have to make all those adjustments to your quality system, trying to figure out, okay, what customer am I working for and what's the expectation, right? So the goal is, like I said, to make things simpler and raise the bar and really adopt a lot of those automotive tools that have been very successful into the aerospace industry. And it's really goodness, and it's very well done, and it's all supported by that reference material. So some of the things that you're going to see in our OEM specific documents, if we have a specific IT tool to do a task, well, we have to keep our document to be able to reference that tool, right? If there's any exceptions, which we're trying to really minimize the exceptions, but in some cases, like I said, I work at Pratt, I can speak to the Pratt items. There's some items that it's going to take some time to fully adopt AS13100. So our ASQR1 document will align to our quality system a little bit, but we're working really hard to minimize that. And the other OEMs are doing the same thing. But in some cases, it may take a bit of time. But the end goal is to rely on AS13100 and, like I said, greatly reduce what's in our specific requirements. My friends at Rolls-Royce and my friends at GE have published their version calling out AS13100. And I know my counterparts at Safran and myself at Pratt and some of the other folks on the phone have been working really close to get Pratt's document out there. So you're starting to see that, what AS13100 looks like and what the OEM specific documents look like. And you'll probably hear this a couple of times today, but the end goal is by the end of this year, we want to adopt AS13100. So all of us will have our documents published by then. Next slide. So one highlight of AS13100, there's a table. So we have a polling question. What type of supplier are you? We want to make sure this doesn't cause confusion, right? Because you may say, well, I'm a distributor, because that's the title in my company name, right? Well, that may not be the case, right? Because if you build to print, parts for us, you would fall into a different type of supplier, right? So the intent of this is to show, the table is to show what clauses apply to you. And so if you can take a moment to answer the question, the polling question, we'd greatly appreciate it. But, think through your response, because you really need to understand and use the table on the right to understand what type of supplier you are based on what you're delivering and making for us, right? It's not as simple as, well, you know, in my title it says distributor because, you know, I'm XYZ distributor company, but that may not be the case because you could likely be a type 1 supplier if you're making parts to print. So we'd like you to take a second to take the poll. And the goal of this table too is to help you and help auditors understand what's applicable in AS 13100 and then in turn 9100 for the parts that you deliver or the processes that you provide to us or services you provide to us. So, you know, without having the table in AS 13100, you'd have to kind of, it was a little foggy, right? It wasn't very clear. So the goal of this table is to clarify that and help auditors understand what applies to the commodity you deliver. So Becky, hopefully folks are applying or answering.
People are answering the poll. We can give it a few more seconds here,
okay.
And then we can share the results. If everyone wants enter their answer. So let's go ahead and share the results here.
Okay. So I'm not sure if the polling tool is giving some people a hard time.
Yeah, it looks like it's being a little difficult today. So
well, it's probably on the East Coast of the United States, so it's tired, right?
yeah, so I can read off what I can see here. We have, it looks like 44 people chose option A, type 1, make to print. And 25 answered option B, type 2A, design and manufacture. And we have one that chose option D, type 3, distributor. 8 for option E, type 4, special process. And 4, type 5, raw material.
Okay, well, thank you for those who had taken the survey. And thank you for those who may have attempted to take the survey, but it was giving us a hard time. And like I said, this is something you want to pay attention to and make sure that you understand what type of supplier you are. And because it really clearly tells you what clauses apply to you. So it's very important. And like the goal of this table is to help you understand what the expectations are and what clauses would apply to you in 9100. So we think it's a good ad, and it'll help clarify things, and it'll also help with auditors, right? Because you do get audited by your register. So, you know, it's something that can help you with that also. Next slide. So from my perspective, this is one of the most important things for today. It's something hopefully you've already started, but one of the reference materials that we created was a compliance assessment. So this assessment will help you gauge how ready you are to adopt AS 13100. And from my perspective, I know we used the same assessment at Pratt. So we went in and looked at all our internal procedures to make sure we didn't have any gaps. And we also use that for our ASQRL1. So this is something that we really need you to, if you haven't already started, to really take a look at this RM13009 and do your self-assessment. It'll help you close gaps. You know, there's a little chart there and you see green, yellow, red. Don't let the red scare you. The red just means you have some work to do, right? So for some of us, human factors is relatively new. So when you're going through this compliance assessment, you may find that, hey, I need to adjust my quality management system, and that may show up red. And then, you know, the reference material that we keep talking about, or the gold books, is a great aid for that, because there's a RM from memory. It's M1, or it's RM130010, I think, for human factors. That'll help you, and you can use that as a tool if you have to make changes to your quality management system. So if you haven't done so, you really need to take a look at this RM and start your self-assessment, because each of us really expect you to be compliant by the end of the year. So when 1/1/2023 comes around, you have all your gaps closed. Or worst case, you at least have a plan to have all your gaps closed, but you should have all your gaps closed. So if you haven't done so, please start your self-assessment. If you go to the AESQ webpage, there is actually a page that'll show you who each member is from each company for each of the RMs, so they can also help you. So say you had a G specific question, if you go to the AESQ webpage, you can find out who the focal is for that reference material. But I'll say it one last time and then I'll stop. But please start your self-assessment, and it's a very big enabler to be successful, and it'll really help you understand where you're at. And just a tip, something that worked very well for us, at least for Pratt & Whitney, we have a 9100D equivalence matrix that we use for auditors. So all the clauses in 9100, it tells you all our internal procedures, and as you could imagine, there's quite a few. We use that as a guide to help us populate the compliance assessment. So that's something that worked for us. But please start that and start closing those gaps, and use the resources provided by the AESQ. There's frequently asked questions. There's a lot of material that we've prepared to help you make this easy. Next slide. So one of the sections, section 8.3, is design and development. All the goodness in AS13100, we want to make sure that that applies if you design and develop hardware for us. So in many cases, or some cases, we'll buy a component or a piece of hardware from you, and it's your design. You're the subject matter expert. So we want to make sure that you're applying 9145, APQ, P, and PPAP. You're doing design Pfmeas. If you're a make to print supplier, a lot of times we would do that internally, right, at our OEM sites. But we want to make sure that you're doing design Pfmeas. You have cross-functional teams. You're, really understanding that everything is in place per AS13100 to be successful. So once again, I know you're surprised, but there's a reference material that covers that, RM13008. So that'll guide you through what the expectation is with case studies and real life examples. So this really isn't anything new, but it kind of takes everything and puts it into one spot if you do design and development work for us. So we see this as a great aid and a help, right? Because can be awkward sometimes, right? It's your design, and we try to encroach and understand everything, and you're like, well, this is what I do, this is my IP. So if you use these suite of tools, you'll be very successful. And this is one example of some of the changes in AS13100. And this may not apply to everybody, right? If you don't work in design and development, then obviously this wouldn't apply to you. Next slide. So some more highlights. There's section 8.4.1, 8.4.2, supplier self-evaluation and controls. one of the big feedbacks from the team members was we need to create a scenario where you can do a very in-depth self-assessment of yourself, like audit yourself per RM13007. And the end goal is to make it so the OEMs can kind of look at what you have done and really streamline the audit process, because many of you have given us feedback that you spend so much time entertaining the OEMs via audits. So the end goal is to try to build a process where you can show us that you're doing your due diligence, and we can use this to help streamline or reduce audits. Next slide, please. So the biggest benefit to this is there's a single document, right, for 9100 and 9145. We lessen the requirements by greater than 50%, and we reduce cost. You know, we published 5 procedures. We were about to publish 2 more, and we were adopting them, like I said, in our, ASQ R01s, S1000, Sabres, and Safes, and we didn't really meet the mark in our eyes. So when the committee came back together and said, let's create this AS13100, and that's what we did. So there's one document for you to purchase, and there's also a reduction in requirements. And that's with some of the additional asks, right? Like the audit one I just showed you, or I talked about human factors. Please use the reference material. It's free, it's available to you. There's a lot of resources there. We put a lot of energy into those. And, I'm not going to read each element that's on the slide, but you kind of get the picture that this allows us to harmonize, standardize, and we really see it as a win for you and a win for us. Next slide. So this is the writing team. We want to take a second to thank them. As you can imagine, this is really hard, right? It's hard sometimes to work with the folks that you work at your own company. And we all work very well together. We're almost like a family now because we spend so much time together. But here's the core writing team. And they would help along with Becky. Becky's picture should be in the center in bold and large, help herd everyone and drive this through till it's, completed. So it's a lot of work. So I'm going to take a second to thank all these folks. And then there's a lot of other folks in the next slide, please, that have contributed, right? So it's not just the folks you just saw, but these are the 99 plus subject matter experts that contributed to all the reference material. And a lot of these folks volunteer their time at the IAQG level, creating, supporting the AESQ. So there's a lot of good material there, and we want to thank them for all their hard work. And they continue to contribute and support the document. We're always looking for feedback. So, we had polling questions. There's lots of ways that you can give us feedback if you go to the AESQ webpage too. Or you can just send them an email thanking them for their hard work. All right, well, thank you for your time today. I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, I have one more. So I think I talked to this a lot, but the reference material is there. The first thing you should do when you click on that link is go to that RM13009, complete your self-assessment, and then utilize these goal books or reference material, because they're very well done. They're free to you. It's something that we can change pretty swiftly because it's posted on our webpage. So if you have a business case or something you think you can add, we can submit it and look at it. We want to continually look at the material and make it better. And that's the nice part of the reference material being separate from the standard. Slide. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth Pace. She's going to talk about deployment.
Thank you, Earl. So my name is Elizabeth Pace. and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy for Supplier Quality at Raytheon Technologies, and I am also the lead for the deployment team for the AESQ. Next slide. Okay, so we heard from Emmanuel and Earl, AS13100 is a standard that's released as supplemental requirements for 9100 and 9145 and how they apply to the aerospace engine manufacturers. This is our way of aligning on a common set of requirements, tools, and training. The standard was released on March 1st of last year, and the deployment team has been working on helpful tools, surveys to get feedback from our suppliers on how we can help you, and then also things like communities of practice and webinars to connect the industry on these topics. Compliance for our supply chain is set for the end of this year, and AS13100 leverages all the good work the AESQ has released over the last few years. Next slide. So this year, the AESQ is focused on deployment and achieving the benefits of collaboration. As you'll see throughout this presentation, each of our companies are working on adding AS13100 to its own internal flowdown and mechanisms. While doing that, we're also removing any duplicate requirements within our own legacy flowdowns. As you've heard, what will come out of ASQR1, Sabre, and others will be a reduction in unique OEM requirements. We have also have subject matter interest groups, or SMIGs, which have been working tirelessly to release tools and best practices by topic. The thought is that by aligning on the requirements we see as the best practices and eliminating the unique requirements, which just add more burden, we will get better quality and be able to partner better with you, our supply chain. Next slide. So, all 10 AESQ member companies are committed to a compliance date of December 31st of 2022. I have received some feedback through the survey that it seems like we're all moving at different speeds. As you'll see later in this presentation, the deployment team has set milestones for each company to achieve, but we do also allow for some flexibility within each of these companies. If I was to say, everyone has to release their flowdowns by June 1st, that could be a little more difficult. So we've allowed for the flexibility, but all the while still communicating that we are going to be compliant for December 31st of 2022. We are going to meet the training requirements. We are going to have our gaps done. AS 13009 will be completed. So we are all committed to that compliance date of December 31st, 2022. Next slide. So here you'll see our overall supplier preparation milestone plan. As you can see that we're tracking through and now working on updating our QMS procedures and flowdowns. I've been working with Pratt and Whitney closely, and we're actually in ballot right now for ASQR01, so you should be seeing that published by June 1st. Each member company is training quality professionals right now in order to be prepared. And so now I'd like to save some time and turn over to June Sakai. We're going to be taking an in-depth look at a couple of the member companies and how they're working on their deployment plans. June?
Hi, everyone. I'm Yamamoto Hiroshi, speaking from IHI Metropolitan Tokyo Suburban. Now the cherry blossom season is over, and now the best season is coming now. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce us very briefly of a IHI company corporation. Our company established about 170 years ago. So we will celebrate the 170th anniversary next year. And we all IHI groups makes tunnel, bridge, or tunnel machines, turbocharger, industrial heat furnace also. So one of the big heavy industry companies. Please go to next. This is the profile of our air engine space defense business area. Unfortunately, because of mainly the novel coronavirus situations, our sales is falling down the year 2020. But we will now calculating the last year's, we will keen recovery in the 2021. And our business is mainly making and overhauling the air engines and also the engines of the space rockets also. Please go to next. Okay, this chart is showing that not good shapes, but previous architecture shows only showing the our QMS is based on the 9100, but current architecture is of course including this pyramid chart. Our IHI QMS is based on the now AS13100, including the AS9145. This is showing introducing the PPAP, the APQP. And also, we are now reforming our current QMS architecture, including the AS9110. And we will require our suppliers for the AS9120. And Japanese unique requirement for QMS is ASJAC 9068. This is one of the enhancing requirements of the 9100. So we are now using this pyramid chart to explain how we reforming our QMS to our company senior management people and also the suppliers. Please go to next. This is a deployment strategy group dashboard, and the red circle is our IHI portion. Now we have reached milestone 4 so far. We are aiming to completing remaining milestones by the end of this year, meaning that 2022. Please go to next. This is our position. Green highlight is the May and springtime, April and May. And we started kickoffs the last year, December, and now we're rushing up the activities to reforming our QMS. We plan AS13100 deployment schedules for internal and supplier respectively. Please go to next. This is a sample of the gap analysis. The result of AS13100 gap analysis has been verified by each task force team in order to revise or create internal procedures related to AS13100. We use this kind of gap analysis chart and proceeding reforming our QMS systems. Next slide, please. Our deployment strategy of the AS13100. We are organizing the team, 13 task force teams, as you can see this chart. and promoting the creation of IHI quality management system based on the AS13100 Deployment. Each progress has been monitored monthly. We discuss very actively internally. Next slide, please. This is a final chart, I think. This is the strategy and fall down streaming chart. We have been communicating with main subsidiary companies, IHI Group's companies, about this AS13100 deployment status each other regularly. And the introduction to IHI Group companies, then applicably Table 1 and gap analysis, and regular contacts with IHI Group companies. After we discussing with our vertical supply chain in IHI groups, we will discuss with our outside outsourcing companies. This is our status and the deployment. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is Anne. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiroshi Yamamoto, for that presentation. Our next speaker is Michael Mrosuski from MTU Aero Engines Quality Management Programs. Michael?
Becky, and hello everybody from my side. And I will give you a short overview of how MTU is running the deployment. So Becky, next slide, please. Oh, we can go directly to the next one. Okay. So first of all, I would like to give you an overview of how we set up the implementation of the standard at MTU. What we did, we implemented a company-wide structure with a steering committee, which is basically driven by the quality departments. So quality systems, then quality covering the in-house production, but also looking at our supply chain, where we jointly looking every 2 months on the status in terms of how far we got and what are the next steps. But the core team below that, which is doing really the work, is led by quality and supported by core members throughout the entire structure of MTU, as the new standard is affecting not only quality itself, that means the quality organization, because the branches are running throughout the entire disciplines. And the core team is basically defined by design, procurement, production, program office. But if we see during the work any kind of need to pull in further team members, we do so. And the foundation are the experts in content or subject matter experts, which really can help us to assess all the elements and expertise to fill in the content as required. Next slide, please. How do we achieve the compliance according to the plan? So I think the little picture on the left top you saw before, and below we have in principle 2 branches, 2 swim lanes. So in the first quarter, in principle after publication, we defined the project, the setup, and kicked off the project. And throughout the last year, we ran the delta assessment, the identification of the details in what is really required. We defined the actions, and basically the scope of this year up to the autumn principle is really to do the hard work. That means assess the gaps in detail, and define the need of specs updates, or even to define new processes. And in parallel to that, we already started the training of the A3100 to have our organization right on time to be ready. And what is our target? To have a project review completed in the autumn timeframe and run an internal compliance assessment to have time till the end of the year really to go in detail and discover, in case there's any gaps to be closed, that we can proceed, that we are ready for the start of 2023, that we are compliant. Second element is, how do we deal with our suppliers? That's the second swim lane. So we started pretty early in summer last year to flow down the information to our suppliers. That's what we're doing regularly. And also beginning of this year, we started to work in detail with our supplier management at MTU to get involved with the suppliers, and also to get an understanding how far they are and what might be the challenges they are facing. And I think what is important, it will not end with the implementation of the A3100. That will continue, because I think that's important that we work closely together. Next slide, please. Here's an insight how we did it in detail. On the left side, you see a snapshot out of the compliance self-assessment, which was mentioned before. And what we did, we did our compliance matrix based, or took our compliance matrix based on the AS13100 and broke it down in details. So for each requirement, we defined a project accountable key account. We defined the responsible experts, then, which is in reference to the assessment, the standard. But also we checked right at the beginning where we are in terms of compliance. Are we already compliant? Or is there really then actions needed? What are the actions? Who is responsible and due date? And to have a forecast and also a status where we are at the end of the project. And so we went through all the paragraphs of all the elements. And for example, for the chapter A, we broke it down to 413 the chart you can see on the right hand side at the top, that we can track down of every single requirement we have, where we are in terms of the completion of the assessment. Next slide, please. And that's the overview for the implementation status at MTU. So in total, if you look at the entire specification, we have identified 631 requirements. And for chapter A and C, which are covering the most of that, we are already there, that we are identified all the gaps, all the actions are defined, and we are in good shape to be ready to have the system updated by the autumn of this year. What is not surprising, I think, the implementation of APQP is more challenging. So we are coming from a production approval process. We introduced PPAP. Process that needs more definition, and also needs, in some instances, definition of new processes. What are the next steps is, I think, pretty straightforward. We have to do our homework, close our action plans, complete the training throughout the organization, and also have very, very close contact to our supply base to support the deployment, and run together with them through the implementation status, that we can focus on our joint target. That would be from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So Catherine from Safran Aircraft Engines will talk to us about their deployment.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Katarina, working for Safran Aircraft Engine, and I will show you where we are at the moment in our company. Next slide, please. So first of all, as you know, you might know Safran is a world leader in aerospace, and we are not just an engine manufacturer. So next slide, please. So Safran as a group, of course, we are in aircraft propulsion, but also a lot of equipments. You might know some like the nacelles, landing system, and so on. Also aircraft interiors, defense, and also we are in the space activity. So this is the reason why our requirement, our common requirement to our supply base, named SAFE, is a bit complicated today. Next slide, please. So how is the structure of SAFE today? Today, SAFE, so our main requirement to our supply chain, is mainly done with 3 documents. Those who are working with us already know that. So we have, of course, the main procedure. We have what we call a compliance matrix to the requirements, which is clearly similar to the matrix you are using for AS13100. And of course, we have guidance, a manual, a provider, and books. So in fact, SAFE has the same shape as AS13100. We also have activity types and sectors. The sectors we are looking for AS13100 is only the sector S1, which is civil and military engines. So this is the reason why it's something very important to understand is the difference between the structure of SAFE and the link with AS13100. Concerning the activity type, some of them are similar. As you can see, A, B, C mainly are common to between SAFE and AS13100. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing? So AS13100 was issued in March 2021. We have decided we will flow down to only S1 suppliers, as mentioned before. In fact, only few Safran companies are concerned by this AS13100, mainly Safran aircraft engine I'm speaking for today. We won't be able to modify SAFE before 2024 to prevent mixing messages because we have already modified SAFE in December 2020, and you will see that we have tried to be coherent with AS13100. So we don't want to mix all the message for the whole supply chain for the whole Safran group. And we have an ongoing project since June 2021 about AS13100 deployment. Next page, please. So these are the milestones Liz was talking about. These milestones are the one we need to answer to and following up within the deployment group. Next slide, please. I will go deeper into, something went wrong, I suppose. I don't know about the shape of that presentation, but anyway, sorry about that. So what have we been doing? First of all, we have done the gap analysis for our requirements because, for example, we are a supplier to GE, so we need to answer to this RM 13009. So we answer as a supplier, we have reviewed the main difficulties, and also we have starting the learning curve and training for those involved in the gap analysis internally within Safran aircraft engines. Today, we are already compliant to more than 75% of the matrix. We have an action plan, and we should be able to be compliant about 95% by the end of the year. Two statements we need to discuss with our customer. Second phase is the gap with SAFE. So we have compared SAFE and identified the supplemental requirement SAFE towards AS13100, so RM 1309, and also the other way around, so AS13100 towards SAFE. Then we are still in the process, and you can see in orange, Safran aircraft engine has some supplementary requirements, so more requirements than SAFE, and we are identifying which one can also answer to the RM 13009. So this is the work we are just finishing and should be finished in 2 weeks. Next slide, please. So how will it be? Okay, so sorry, because my presentation is really, I don't understand why it's like that. But what I wanted to show you is an example of the communication we have started to prepare with all the common requirements, the additional requirements. So as I told you, so SAFE versus AS13100, and the other way around, SAFE. So the other way around, what is more in RM 13000 and what is more in SAFE. So this communication kit is quite ready. Concerning Chapter B, we have very few gaps, and an action plan has been launched and already finalized, because we have tried during while we were preparing AS13100, we were also working internally to be as much to have almost or even the same requirements. So we are quite in good shape for our Chapter B and C. Next slide, please. So some of difference, I see the presentation is still not the right way. So just to show you some of the difference we have today, you will see it's not really the biggest chapter. We have quite a few in section 7. So mainly the on-job training. Of course, as Earl mentioned previously, the auditor competencies requirements. This is quite a difference from what we were asking you before in SAFE. Also, of course, the AESQ Quality Foundation training course, because this is new. Also, the use of handheld spectrometry, and something also which is much more detailed than before, the supplier evaluation, selection control, and performance monitoring. So these are some examples of the more requirements that are in AS13100 compared to SAFE. Next, please. Those that are already common to SAFE. So we have the APQ PPAP, which is quite similar today. Of course, the FOD, we were already working with you on FOD prevention, and we had references the same standard. Of course, human factor, we have started requesting human factor initiative in your QMS in 2015. So that's why it's not a new requirement for us. Also, the use of AD problem for cluster escape is something we were already asking in SAFE. So as you can see, changes are not that big. Next slide, please. So I'm a bit lost with that, sorry. Of course, you will need to conduct that compliance matrix. But it's the same way we were asking you to do that for SAFE with the GRF 0033. What we want to do with you, if you have already, if your SAFE compliance matrix already exists, then you will have to demonstrate only the compliance to the supplementary requirements that are in AS 13100. On the other side, if you have already completed the RM 009, then to be compliant to SAFE, we will send you an Excel file with the missing requirements to fulfill SAFE. So we will try to save time and to give you some already prepared Excel files. With it, we will send you a communication kit to explain in detail the differences. Next slide, please. So if I come back to the milestone, so milestone 2, so the project plan member executive was approved in June 29th, 2021. Concerning the communication plan internally, it's already in process for main actors. It started last year. We are preparing the communication for the whole process because we want to deploy that internally, and the objective is the third trimester 2022. And as I said, communication plan has been launched already with main actors. Communication plan, so milestone 4 to our supply base. So we our communication kit is mostly finalized. We will send it second trimester, so before the end of June. Next slide, please. So training plan executed internally, so we have started and we will extend during the summer. The training plan to supply base, we will start in September after having flowing down during the summer the AS 13100 and all the communication kit and equivalencies with SAFE. So it will save time, and in fact, even if we haven't flown down it strictly today, we have communicated to the supply base. It will come, and the work to do that will remain is not that difficult. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And I will give the hand to Greg Hyatt from Pratt & Whitney, and he will present deployment at Pratt. Thank you.
thank you very much. All right, so let me introduce myself. My name is Greg Hyatt, and I am the Supplier Metallurgical Control Specialist for Japan and Taiwan, part of the Quality and Process Engineering Group at Pratt & Whitney. Today I'm going to discuss with you the Pratt & Whitney AS13100 deployment. Next slide, please. So, transition of ASQR01 to AS13000 something. The ASQR journey has progressed and now is influenced by AS13100. As you can read on this slide, Pratt & Whitney has been deploying AS13000X from 2015 through 2019. However, the requirements are not in one procedure. This leads us to AS13100. Next slide, please. AS13100 Gap Assessment. As was mentioned a few times by Earl a few minutes ago, Pratt & Whitney utilized the RM13009 self-assessment to close any potential gaps within our own QMS. Okay, next slide. As the other OEMs have started or completed, we are taking what is in ASQR01 Rev 11 and removing the old AS13000X and adopting AS13100. There will be items that remain in ASQR01 Rev 12 that is critical to our QMS. This is continuing to evolve. You can see from the chart, kind of a visualization of ASQR 13100 replacing or becoming more of a part instead of the ASQR01 Rev 11. That brings me to my next slide. ASQR01 Rev 12. Pratt & Whitney is reducing the number of pages and the number of shalls in ASQR01 Rev 12. And this is because we're able to base on the International Aerospace Standard AS13100. As has been discussed today, there's several new additions in AS13100. So even though we are reducing ASQR01, the number of pages and the number of shalls are being reduced significantly, we will drive better quality and delivery by harmonizing and standardizing around one Aero engine procedure. Next slide. ASQR01 Pratt & Whitney Addendum. So the formatting will align with AS9100, AS9145, and AS13100 paragraph sections. And this will apply to Pratt & Whitney America and Pratt & Whitney Canada. The target release is in Q2. Okay, next slide. All right. ASQR01 and AS13100 communications, standard and hosted communications are being deployed. So let me talk about that. Pratt & Whitney is conducting multiple events and communications to facilitate the adoption of AS13100. These include eagle-eye communications with suppliers, AS13100 Pratt & Whitney supplier information webcasts. In February, we had 962 attendees. April, 415 attendees. We have planned webcasts in May, July, September, and November. We have 5 individual 2-hour sessions each round to cover all time zones. In addition, we have internal AS13100 familiarization webcasts. In March, 3 sessions were completed, and we're going to have more sessions to be held as needed. Let's see, material is also hosted, as you can see on the slide, is hosted on the Pratt & Whitney and the Pratt & Whitney Canada supplier portals. Next slide. Okay, so the next portion is going to be presented again by Elizabeth Pace for the deployment dashboard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, just quickly, my apologies to Hiroshi Yamamoto. I'm on my 2nd cup of coffee now, so I shouldn't make any more mistakes like that. So a big thank you to him and Michael and Catherine and Greg for those focused presentations. If you go to the next slide. So as you can see here, this is our deployment strategy group dashboard. And we meet every other week as a team and go through where we are within our journey. I have been kind of monitoring the chat, and I do see that, you know, there are still some questions on why you're going to get or see the flow downs change at different times. Now, we set these milestones as the deployment team as, you know, high-level project plans. But I want to reiterate, we are all committed to compliance of this standard by December 31st of 2022. You may see SAFE or, you know, ASQ 1 or SABRE or any of the other member company flow downs come out at different times calling out AS13100. But what you will notice is the compliance is December 31st of 2022. I would encourage each of you as suppliers to the OEMs to use this same type of milestone plan in order to work through deployment at your own company. Make sure to complete the gap analysis ASAP to understand and work with your customer on any gaps you may have and document any exception management before that compliance date of December 31st, 2022. Next slide. So, you know, really just some quick highlights to recap. All member companies are working on their flow downs over the next few months, but compliance is aligned, December 31st. AS13100, December 31st of 2022. Company-specific requirements, we are working to reduce those. We do not want to continue on with any unique or with majority being unique requirements. We are really aligning on the different tools and training and standards all within AS13100. 13100 is supported by free issue reference manual guides, LinkedIn communities of practice, and webinars. And we also have common training requirements that are being provided by third-party professionals and is available globally. Next slide. In addition to our own company milestones, I've talked a little bit about how we've established these subject matter interest groups, or SMIGs, which are in charge of the tools, reference manuals, feedback, communities of practice, and webinars by each of the topics that you'll find within AS13100. Recently, we've had webinars on FAI, AD, human factors, and defect prevention. We're also in planning phases for additional webinars, which will be rolling out over the next few months. Each of these groups meets regularly, is completing charters, is active on LinkedIn with communities of practice, and June Sakai will be talking after the break on how to get involved. Next slide. To date, we've had 11 communities of practice launched through LinkedIn, and we have 1,532 members that are participating. Next slide. Please go to our webpage in order to see the latest offerings for webinars and events as well. And maybe by the end of this year, we'll even get to start to talk about getting back together face-to-face. So I will turn back over to Becky, and I think we have a break next.
We're going to take a 15-minute break, everyone. If you watch the screen, the slides will count down for you. So we ask that everyone please rejoin us in 15 minutes. Thank you. So welcome back from the break, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Pace and Jim Wilson to talk about the AS13100 Deployment Survey results.
Thank you, Becky. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Slide.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
We're going to tag team this. We figured after a pause, we probably needed, a couple people to get you going, especially since it's so early. My name is Jim Wilson. I'm a senior manager in supplier quality development, Pratt Whitney Canada. As you can imagine, Pratt Whitney Canada and Pratt Whitney are one company and yet two companies. So we coordinate a lot on efforts that we do together. I've been on the AESQ writing team, various writing teams for 6, 7, 8 years now. So I've been heavily involved with the deployment team, the communication team, and all the ongoing things that we're trying to get AS13100 implemented in.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier that one of the tools that we're using as part of the deployment team in order to collect feedback from our suppliers is the survey. And so we just recently sent out our second one to get feedback. Our first one was sent in August of 2021, and we gave some results from that at the last supplier forum. We had 158 respondents in the August timeframe. We just sent out the latest one in April of 2022. So far, we've actually received 482 respondents to date. Our first survey was really around creating a baseline for deployment well before that deadline, kind of see what the familiarity was. This time it was a little more focused, who are your OEMs that you deal with, and, have you started to kind of move along your journey a little bit more? So we'd like to just take a few moments to talk about some of those results. Anything to add here, Jim?
No, just at the bottom there, for all of those that completed the survey that might be online, 608 comments. We have 608 active comments. So not only do we have the data that we're going to show you, the easy stuff to put on a graph, but there's comments there that we are going through one at a time to see if there are issues that we can help you with. And a lot of those are very helpful for us in setting up FAQs, and as well as just, responding to certain respondents who have left their name and email voluntarily. We can get back to them and give them some feedback on their specific questions. So if you're ever participating in these kind of things, and even the surveys that we do here, please, those are very important to us. So just keep that up. Next slide.
Okay, next slide.
Want me to take this? That's what we take. So basically, this is a very simple slide because it's basically where you are and what is the size of your business. And this very, very much reflects the Aero engine supply base as overall. So this wasn't very surprising to us. It's just maybe it's surprising to you. The breakdown was pretty much North America. 70% of the suppliers are in North America. Now, remember, please, whenever we're talking about any of these graphs, any of the responses, these are respondents. There could have been multiple people from the supplier responding to our survey. So all we can talk about is the number of responses that we got. It doesn't necessarily mean the number of suppliers. So just keep that in mind, please. That's a very important part. But again, similarly to what we think the market is, 36% of suppliers that responded are less than 100 employees. These are the people that the AESQ has been working hard to try and make sure we keep in mind when we do AS13100 and all of our AS13000 documents, because we know that the big multinationals may be easier for them to implement some of these things, but it's the smaller businesses that we have a lot of, 36% there and another 23% under 200 employees. That's more than 50% of our market is pretty companies overall.
Well, I'd say too, just from this graph, we have almost 80% that's, less than 500. So yeah, those are smaller companies, right?
Yeah.
And so, predominantly from North America.
And we knew that, and that wasn't a big surprise. But it was nice to find out that, what we suspected the responses were going to be like actually turned out to be. Slide, Becky. This one of the things we did this time, last time we asked you how many of the OEM members do you supply to, and it was just a 0 to 1, 1 to 3, 3 to 5. So we weren't able to do much with it. This year we asked each respondent which specific AESQ members are you a supplier to? And you were able to check off as many of the names here that you see. Very much similar to what we find in our DPRV training, the 13001 standard. Most respondents, on average, have 3.75 of the 10 AESQ members as customers. So almost 4 customers per supplier. So when we start to think about what we did and all the introduction you got today on how we got to 13,100, this is exactly why we're doing that. It's because we know that with 4 different AESQ customers today, you've got GE, you've got Rolls, you've got Pratt, you've got Safran, and you've got to be compliant to all of their individual customer-specific requirements. Hopefully, 13,100 will help very much streamline your compliance because it's going to take up 80–90% of what you need to be compliant to, with only a little bit left in the ASQR1 or Sabre, or eventually SAFE. So again, 3.75. Most of you out there, are you in that range kind of thing? Some were very large, but most were just around that average there. Slide.
Next slide.
So this one's a little hard to comprehend. These categories are the 5 categories that we asked you about your actual implementation status. So the bottom is bad, you haven't begun anything, and it goes up to the top, the light blue at the top, which is basically respondents that believe their company is already compliant to 13,100. We very much appreciate the drop in the 2 bottom categories, the blue and the red. So that's dropped significantly the number of companies that have barely even started their journey. That number.
Yeah, important to note here too, the first one is with 158 responses, whereas the second is 482. Yeah. So if we're more looking at kind of percentages here, and that growth within the purple, that may show as, almost tripling, but then you have to also factor in the number of respondents. So it's even greater.
The disturbing part is maybe that 35% of you, or the respondents, 35% of the respondents haven't really started the RM 13009 self-evaluation. That's where the green starts. So 35% of you who need to be compliant at December 1st or January 1st, 2023, haven't even started the compliance. I'm not sure it's in this presentation, but multiple presentations in the past, we've shown suppliers a timeline of what we believe they should be starting certain activities. And I can tell you, not having started a 13,009 self-evaluation, which we believe should have been started back in September of last year, if you haven't started that already, you are very far behind in being compliant for January 1st. The interesting cute one, and again, because of the number of respondents, it may not be actual data, but the top one there, where more people thought they were already compliant to 13,100 back in 2021 than they do today, which is kind of, it explains that, they're paying attention to what is in 13,100 and maybe reassessing, or it might just be because of the vast difference in the number of respondents that we had. But so we're looking for this graph to continue. We're hoping to do another survey in the fall, which I hope will show a even better trend and hopefully have the similar number of respondents too. So please, when you get that notification, go ahead and complete it then. Slide. Not sure what the next one was. Oh yeah. We, as I think Earl's talked about, we talked about earlier, that we've been doing a series of sessions for Pratt & Whitney suppliers kind of thing. And we've been asking our suppliers what it is in the 13,100 that concerns them most. Now here we're doing it at the AESQ level. So we asked our respondents, and they could check off as many of these as they wanted. What are the areas of 13,100 that you have the highest, you believe is the highest risk for you to be compliant in by January 1st, 2021? So APQP and the AS9145, which is obviously a large portion of 13,100, the whole chapter B and pretty much chapter C. Yes, we understand that. Human factors continues to be strong from the last survey as well. So, for example, at Pratt, our last round of supplier talks, we got a hold of our friend Catherine, who you heard from earlier, and we got some slides together to talk about human factors with our suppliers specifically. Sub-tier management, AS 13,100 training are up there as well. So this just tells us where we as the AESQ need to maybe provide you with more information, bring up these topics more, maybe schedule some more of the webcasts that we're constantly doing, which I think is the next slide, Becky.
Yep. So if you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage everyone to, really get involved. There's a lot of learning opportunities that are being offered by AESQ. There is the third-party training, of course, but then we also have, topic-specific learning opportunities. So each of the past events that we've had, the webinars, you can go right onto the website and watch those. They have been recorded. You can go onto the website and see what the upcoming webinars are and sign up for those. But then even joining within LinkedIn, joining those communities of practice, if you have a question, you throw it out in the community of practice and you get real-time responses, right? So as a community, we can start to answer those questions together.
Search for AESQ LinkedIn and you'll find those communities pretty easily. The upcoming webinars as well, there is a series of, Becky, please stop me if I'm wrong, but we record those webinars too. So there's even an access to some of the past webinars and their own specific topics. That last graph that we showed you, some of those very specific topics we have been doing webinars on. The human factors webinar was done, I think, just a couple of weeks ago. So, I'll
say that the greatest asset that we have is really the LinkedIn communities of practice. And I showed the dashboard before the break for each of the subject matter interest groups. Problem-solving methods are 8D, DPRV, process control, MSA, defect prevention, quality audit sub-tier, design methods, human factors, FAI, and APQP all have community practice established on the LinkedIn page now, with 1,500 members that have already joined.
And experts from the AESQ, those experts in those various subjects are the ones that are monitoring those communities and responding to things on those communities. Slide. This last one, again, I'm going to get preachy about where you are in your advancement in being compliant to 13,100. This is a combination of two questions from the survey. The first one was what we saw before, which is where are you in your implementation status? But then there was a second question that asked how much of your AS 13,100 required training have you completed? The message here is simply, the vast number of you, and this is the number of respondents, haven't even got over 10% of the training done. 10% of the individuals that you've identified as quality leaders that are required to take the two courses that are outlaid in 13,100. But you can also see that, as the training is advanced to almost 100%, it's much higher in the implementation phase. So the message is get started on your RM 13,009 self-assessment, schedule your training as soon as possible because that will help you to do the assessment, at least the level 2 training. Schedule your level 3 quality foundations training as soon as possible because that's instructor led and those sessions are filling up very quickly. That will help you to get to the January 1st requirement to be compliant. And I think a last slide.
Yep, and it's just really a summary of what we've been saying. Launch your company into a good position for compliance, right? Understand your position, complete that gap analysis. The tools are right there for you. They're very easy to follow. You can download them for free, right? Get involved, sign up for those webinars and communities of practice, ask your questions in real time, get those answers from the experts and the people that helped write these standards, right? And then further your knowledge. Reach out for any training opportunities, including webinars. Everything is communicated right through that web page. So thank you for your time.
Yep. Joy.
And now I think we are turning over to Carl Evans to focus on APQP.
So hopefully you can hear me clearly. My name's Carl Evans. I work for Rolls-Royce. I'm in the role of APQP Technical Project Manager. A little bit of background on the subject in regards to me. AS9145, I was one of the original writers of the standard. And in respects to the adaptions and additions, which are very small in terms of AS13100, I was one of the leaders of the team that worked through that. So we can move to the next one, please. So just as a starting point, just thinking about APQP in respects to our commodities, our supply chains, our business aerospace. Without doubt, increased product safety is the big topic on our minds. And with higher levels of quality, there's an absolute correlation with increased product safety. When considering APQP and PPAP, you know, its primary objective is two things: to improve quality and reduce cost. So there's a real strong tangible link between APQP and PPAP and increase product safety, as well as benefits around cost. Next, please. So what are some of the pillars when we talk about aerospace that enables improved quality and cost reduction? Well, firstly, and it's, you know, it's a message I've just heard all the way through so far today. We're talking about one standard, you know, one common process up and down the supply chain. What's the benefit when we talk about APQP? It removes wasted effort and miscommunications. When we talk about a subject, a requirement, we're commonly talking about the same thing. We haven't got different names for it. It becomes clear for everybody. The synchronization up and down the supply chain, APQP drives, you know, the upfront requirements capture, the upfront planning, the middle ground, which is all about design and developing the product and the processes, and the latter half, which is about validating. That provides us with a real strong synchronization and therefore removes waste up and down the supply chain. We should be doing the right things together at the right time. When another pillar to improve quality and cost reduction is products reaching maturity faster. How many times have you gone through a cycle where you may have changed a design, you may have introduced a method change, you may have transferred from one facility to another? Have you done the right engineering up front at the right time? You go into production, you haven't done those requirements, those good practices, and then you're living with the consequences afterwards through revalidating, problem solving, removing, etc., waste, etc. So what APQP really drives is really upfront understanding of what's expected to drive fewer engineering changes and fewer defects in the early stages, and therefore it allows the product and the manufacturing process and the supply chain become a more mature, industrialized, being a more industrialized state and more mature in terms of the product far earlier than perhaps more traditional ways of going about product realization. And then the other pillar that it provides is it provides a really proactive toolbox to focus cross-functional teams, specifically around identifying risk early and mitigations in that. You know, the front end's all about understanding what the requirements are. It's all about early understanding of what risks could be potentially sitting there in the design of the product, the design of the process, and mitigating those. And then moving through a cycle which allows the cross-functional team, because PPAP and APQP are something that is not one function's responsibility or involvement. It allows the team really to get behind engineering the product and the process well to then move into a sensible state of validation. If you could move on one more, please. And really a bedrock to all this isn't all about, when we talk about APQP, implementing, say, a new product design, or it's more than that. It really puts a foundation in place for ongoing change management. So what do I mean that? When we, you know, updates to design, modifications, works transfers, changes in the manufacturing methods, it builds a really sound foundation for ongoing change management. So there's three really strong pillars which benefit the aerospace industry and supply chain, and there's a really strong foundation which drives improved quality and cost reduction. You could move on, please. So, yeah, as I say, I'm from Rolls-Royce. I'm going to just share some things where we are on in respects to APQP. And also on the next piece, I'm just going to give you a bit of a story around our journey So ourselves, I'm within civil aerospace. We are fully committed to APQP, PPAP and cross-functional working. There's two images you're seeing on screen at the moment. On the left-hand side, it's what's known as the APQP, PPAP timing chart, which is lifted out of AS13100. On the right-hand side, that is a portal, a window into our quality management system. November last year, we updated our quality management system across the whole group significantly. And there's no coincidence at all that the image on the right-hand side has a lot of characteristics to the image on the left-hand side. There are the same APQP PPAP events being called up, kickoff, PDR, CDR, so on and so on and so on. You will also see those chevrons going across, which is the phases of APQP. So we're absolutely committed to the level of transforming our quality management system to enable APQP. Our customers, they are frequently asking for this. It is not unusual for conversations between ourselves and our customers around the subject of APQP and PPAP. And for our suppliers, I'll talk a moment about the journey we've been going through over the years with APQP. But absolutely for our suppliers, AS13100 means a significant reduction in the customer specific requirements we ask for. So if you could move on one, please. So this is a starting point of giving some reflection to yourselves about our journey, and the next piece is I'm going to give you some insights into some of the enablers we've been putting in place to help us move forwards in terms of APQP. So, as I said a moment ago, November last year, we changed our quality management system, and a big part of that was configuring and supporting APQP. So going back over the years, what's our journey to get to this quite significant point? So very, very early days back in 2010, we were very much focused on drivers, which were termed as building quality, making sure we built in quality into the product and the processes around us. And then more recently, the focus has been with a really strong clarity is around zero defects. And they've been really strong drivers back into our business and also in how we view our supply chain. Some of the processes we've had over the years, like many companies, we introduced PPAP quite some time ago, and we've also had other things. Some of you may know about IPPR, which is similar-ish to APQP, but it was really centered on gated questions, reducing the amount of gates, reducing the amount of questions, trying to commonize, if you like, the checkpoints more than anything. Those two factors around the quality improvement drivers and the management processes have given us some really good sound understanding about what the right fabric for APQP should be within our own business. Along that journey, we've had some really key focal points in terms of quality planning activities. Very, very early days, focus was on SPC, understanding really key characteristics of the product. Having transformations around identifying what are the really key important characteristics of the product, and then really getting into risk mitigation through Pfmea and DFMEA and so on and so on. Click one more on, please. So there's two really key things to stress about the journey we've had. Number one, we've switched over absolutely full-heartedly over to APQP through our quality management system. Prior to that switchover, we were having early trials of using aspects of the quality management system. But this journey we've been on has really, really been about adopting industry standards. You know, the quote of AS13000X has come up a number of times today. We've been on that journey for some time. Could you move on one more, please? So inwardly, I've just talked about, I want to reflect externally to our external suppliers, supply chain. Saber's been around for quite a few years. I was lucky enough to be part of the original writers of the very first edition of APQP, and I've been involved through the generations of it. Really early on, back in the turn of the millennium, Sabre came out. In terms of this sort of subject of APQP, we used to have something called MPI requirements. There was no industry standard for us to fall to or relate to, and it was heavy on Rolls-Royce specifics. Very, very heavy in terms of what we were expecting, how we were expected to do it. Sabre 2 was a movement more to standardizing. We really looked out in industry and other industries and what standards there were around APQP, and we brought ourselves more and more aligned to those practices with a mindful thought around what our business environments are about and how they work. So again, we didn't have a standard to fall back on and refer to, but we brought ourselves far closer to APQP and PPAP. That reduced these Rolls-Royce specifics, but there's still a lot there. And really moving forward to Sabre 3 and now Sabre 4, we've now been able to link to an industry standard, and we're really pleased that the position we're in with Sabre 4 is that the actual Rolls-Royce specifics are absolutely minimal now. Can you move on one, please? So that's a bit of a conversation or reflection on terms of the journey we've been on. I've talked about the fact that we've switched over to APQP through our quality management system last year, November. What's some of the sort of reflections I could share with yourselves? And hopefully this sort of generates some thoughts about some of the things you could do to facilitate implementation of APQP in your business. So I will focus really on there's really three strong pillars when you talk about APQP in terms of making this work. Leadership, cross-functional teams, and project management and planning. They're really strong pillars in what actually enables this. You will notice I'm not talking about individual tools now, I'm talking about pillars. So some of the things we've been really driving hard on in terms of enabling APQP, and we're going to be still on the journey for quite some time. But some of the things we've been focusing on in terms of leadership, we put a lot of effort into senior sponsorship and engagement in the whole concepts. We've done this in many ways, but we've really been targeting our senior management and helping them understand what the concepts are around APQP and how they can support the deployment of that. Our business plans have been aligned to support the implementation, and we've taken time out to think about, well, what's some of the novel ways we can really get the messages over. We've created basic, simple simulation games, which we'll play with senior execs to help them understand how this really benefits the business. We've created bite-sized videos, you know, from various individuals with knowledge, which allows people literally to just click online and get some basic insights from knowledge within the business. In terms of cross-functional teams, really important aspect. APQP is not down to one function to enable and enact it. It is a cross-functional team sport. So we've focused heavily on things we call like a launch framework. This helps the team get the project off the ground. We've been very clear for the activities and the APQP elements to have clear races, being clear about who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, etc., etc. So it's very clear who amongst the team is accountable for what. We've constructed what's called user cases. So they're value streams, network diagrams, which basically take you through the steps of the process as laid out in the quality management system from one end to the other. We've also invested time in the different functions that within our business play a really strong role in terms of APQP, and we've had functional coaches to work with those functional groups and develop their knowledge and skills and so on. And we've been really, really keen to adopt industry practice. The reference manual, the gold book 13145, it's got some really good tools in there. So there's things called like the APQP and PPAP timing plan. There's application matrix in there which make it really clear which element would you apply in a source change or a method change and a new design. So we've embraced that and actually built them straight into our quality management system. Why reinvent something when there's some goodness there? The last piece really to sort of highlight is around the planning and management side of things. And I'm very mindful of time. So really some of the things to point out is we've been very strong in terms of helping visualization around managing PPAP and APQP. And we've also, for all the events of APQP, we've had what's known as rapids. Google it, Google rapid decision making, and you'll get an understanding what's meant behind that. But it gives clarity of who makes decisions for the various events of APQP. Could you move on one, please? So I'm just going to give you, before finishing now, what I would call 6 winning cards. These are just some simple thoughts for you to self-reflect on back in your own business in regards to deploying APQP and making it work in your business. So if you could move on one, please. So the first 3 cards are, when I talk about project planning and management, think about confirming who the decision makers are. So if you're unclear, look at the goal book. They're called APQP and PPAP events. Construct rapids around those. Make it really clear for each of those events who's the decider in it. And also couple against that within your project management planning and you know, your project management planning processes. Make sure you've also defined some practices around how you manage concerns. So when you progress through APQP, you go from left to right, you have decision points around events, make it clear who the decider is, but also how do you actually recover situations when things are falling around. In terms of it's a team sport, it's cross-functional. So I've already mentioned about races, you know, another simple task is take the goal book, look at what's called the PPAP deliverables, look at what's called the APQP elements, and construct a RACI for each one of those. Who's accountable? Who should be consulted? And that makes it clearer to everybody back in the business what where their involvement is at a simple level. In terms of your people processes, you need the right people with the right capabilities at the right time to really be successful at APQP. So think hard about your training plans and think hard about your people planning processes. Having the right people up front in the APQP cycle, it can be different to latter when you're through validation, etc. Could we move on one more, please? So the other 3 I'll give you, and I'd recommend anyone at this point in time, take a screenshot. After this call, sit down with that screenshot and put some notes around it, some thoughts around how you can enact some of these back in your business. So the last 3 I'll draw attention to is, firstly, develop your leaders of change. You know, everybody, regardless of the size of your enterprise, will have potential leaders there you want to develop. Some of the things I would sort of quote is think about who's your deployment champions, what's their role. They're there to remove barriers to make things successful. Functional leads, keep heavily talking around this is a team sport. Think about the functions that are involved and have some leads for who are really thinking hard about developing their competencies around there. Around the parts that they play in, and put a core team together, put some bright sparks together who really think about what are the right practices and tools that should be made available back in our organisation to help us do this well. Finally, each time you start APQP, absolutely up front, make sure you understand the requirements. Yeah, invest time in establishing and confirming those early as possible with your customers and stakeholders. And then in terms of progressing, making APQP work as you develop products and processes, or processes on their own, utilize the reference manual. There's some really simple tools in there which help. I've mentioned applicability matrix. I've mentioned the APQP and PPAP timing plan, which gives you a template. Can you move on one, please? So just to wrap up now, if you move on one more and one more. So the final points, and there's a common message about the community of practice coming through. I'm not going to say much more than go to LinkedIn, do a search, find the community of practices. APQP certainly has one, and we're more than happy for people to sign up and join in. Pick the gold book up, take a download if you haven't already, pick it up, read it, take time, consume it. Lastly, when we talk about, so move on one more, please. So lastly, look, community of practices work when we talk to each other. So by all means, raise questions, share ideas and good practices. That's where the benefit comes from, community of practices. So at that point, I shall finish, and thank you very much for giving me the time.
Well, thank you, Carl. So I'd like to introduce Mani Rathanam Rajamani to present the approach and advancement towards AS13100. So welcome.
Thank you, Becky, for the introduction, and thanks to the AESQ team for providing this opportunity. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I am Mani Rathinam Rajamani from Tata Advanced Systems. You can call me Mani. Next slide, please. Today, we from Tata Advanced Systems will be presenting an overview of our approach and advancement practices towards the deployment of AS13100 standard. Next slide, please. The presentation will briefly describe our journey in the transition process of the AS13100 standard. We'll be sharing the Tata Advanced Systems plan, approach, and experiences gained during the transition of the standard and the applicable Aero engine customer-specific flowdown document requirements. We will also be describing the framework, gap analysis, implementation challenges, mitigations, and practices established to ensure effective transition. Next slide, please. Before we start, I would like to give a brief introduction to Tata Advanced Systems. Tata Advanced Systems, also known as TASL, is a 100% subsidiary company owned by the Tata Group. It is one of the leading and largest aerospace and defense companies in India, with strategic business lines in aerostructures and aero engines, development of land, airborne, electronic sensors, and weapon platforms. The aerostructures and aero engines business line has developed 4 centers of excellence in metallics, composites, assembly, and aero engine commodities, and is located in 3 Indian cities, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Nagpur. TASL has a diverse portfolio for providing engineering services, tool design and fabrication, product development related to sheet metal forming, metal and composites fabrication and machining, special processes like heat treatment, chemical processing, and many more, assembling of major aerostructures, and manufacturing, special processing, and assembly of aero engine components. Next slide, please. TASL entered into the aero engine sector as a detail part supplier in 2014 and won contracts with Rolls-Royce and GE Aviation in 2014 and 15 respectively. We joined the G22 Aero Engine Supplier Quality Committee as a liaison member in 2017. We had participated and provided feedback for the improvement in the ballots of AS13006 and AS13100 standards. We have also been participating in the AESQ webinars and supplier forums since 2021. Currently, TASL is working on the transition activities of the standard and the updated customer specific requirements, and we are planning to complete it well before December 2022. Next slide, please. The AS13100 deployment framework was internally developed to systematically focus on planning, educating, executing, reviewing, and monitoring the transition activities. We have developed a detailed framework for identifying the required steps with respect to the 6M methodology. The transition activities were initiated in May 2021, focusing on understanding, planning, and deployment of the QMS, APQP, and core tools supplemental requirements. The current focus is on completing the education and execution phase of the requirements within the product development processes of Tassel's QMS. Later in Q3 of 2022, we'll be focusing on the monitoring of implementation of the requirements and reporting the process compliances and its effectiveness. Next slide. For the AS13100 standard deployment, we have adopted the AESQ's transition milestone format for planning, monitoring, and reporting the activities from April 2021. Currently, we are focused on the development and deployment of the updated procedures, process flows, trainings, software tools, and templates. The goal is to complete the activity well before 31st December 2022 and be external audit ready from Jan 2023. Next slide, please. So when we first received the AS13100 standard flowdown through the GE Aviation's S1000 document in April 2021, during the change impact analysis, there were some common questions and challenges that were raised within the cross-functional teams that need to be answered before initiating the deployment. These included questions with respect to resource planning and allocation in terms of man, mission, method, etc. The CFT team internally brainstormed and developed mitigations to resolve these challenges. The mitigations emphasized the communication to the process owners, the importance, the relevance, and the need and the integration method of the standard requirements to the current QMS processes without any additional efforts that would stop the process which is in place currently, along with communicating the potential transition benefits in terms of people, process, customer, and organizational requirements. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the AS13100 standard consists of 3 chapters that are containing supplemental requirements to 9100, 9145, and the current AESQ defect prevention core tool standards. The objective was to develop an integrated QMS and APQP product development methodology for both new product industrialization and the current production processes for improvement. The chapters were individually and concurrently studied in detail for the requirements mapping, and plans were discussed internally to determine the steps required to integrate with the current QMS system. Next slide, please. The transition approach started with the literature review of the supplemental requirements, reference manuals, and customer flowdown documents. A thorough detailed study mapping of the requirements was planned and completed by the CFT team in late 2021. This study was carried out with respect to the application and integration of the standard and customer requirements within the Tassel QMS system. The applicable requirements were agreed, and the action plan were created by the stakeholders for the implementation at all Aero Engine programs of Tata Advanced Systems for both Aero Engine structures and composite programs. A detailed gap analysis was planned and completed for all sites using the RM 13009 guidance template. The relevant QMS documentations were identified in the Apex QMS that would be requiring changes with reference to updating of existing standard operating procedures and quality assurance plans to enable conformance and compliance to both standard and customer requirements, and development of tools, softwares, templates for documenting, recording, and retaining product conformance and process compliance data to meet those standard requirements. Next slide, please. The AS13100 gap analysis was done for all Aero Engine sites and was also extended to the identification and detailed study of the standard callouts, reference manual linkages, and notes for clarification, which I'll be showing it to you in the next slide. The requirements of the applicable clauses were brainstormed with process owners for the implementation steps. The actions for incorporating standard and customer requirements using the suggested RM guidance were also discussed in these meetings, and actions for updating process flows, implementation timelines, change requests for the procedures, trainings that need to be completed, tools, software, and audit reporting of process results were also discussed during these meetings. Similarly, the not applicable clauses also were identified and excluded in the documented information for future audit clarifications. Next slide, please. So the detailed study identified the standard callout nomenclatures that were used in the standard to determine the requirements, recommendations, capabilities, and permissions. The study was also extended to identify additional standard callouts with respect to the document information, trainings, audits, assessments that are stated in the standard and the customer documents. A similar analysis was done for the chapters B, C, and customer specific flowdown documents and were documented for further actions. Next slide, please. Post the study, we had identified a few differences in the requirements called within the standard with respect to the customer specific flowdown documents. To mitigate the identified differences, an understanding methodology was internally developed to provide recommended actions to users when there is a difference between the standard and customer specific flowdown requirements. This understanding will be used internally to compare the standard and customer requirements for deployment, and it will help the process end users to identify when there is a conflict of requirement. Next slide, please. Along with Chapter A, a concurrent study was carried out on the approach of integrating the APQP methodology with the current TASL program management gated process for the new programs. The integration will support and enhance the current gated process to improve the new product development and industrialization activities. In addition, this integration will help us in streamlining and preventing duplication of processes and activities. Next slide, please. The Chapter C study identified the approach required for integrating core tool supplemental requirements with the current APQP core tool processes at TASL. TASL had already established the APQP core tools within its Aero Engine QMS programs in 2018, and it has been adopted as an industry best practice in the current Aero Engine production programs. The integration will support us in enhancing the current APQP core tool processes and move forward to a proactive defect prevention and improvement stage. Next slide, please. Some of the best practices that have been deployed from the standard in the Pfmea defect prevention methodology are the early involvement of customers in the process risk analysis, identification, and analysis methodology for providing critical inputs such as severity ratings with respect to customer impact, identifying the impact of characteristics and their associated failure modes, understanding the linkage between design and failure modes, focusing on key characteristics, critical and major characteristic controls, deriving occurrence ratings from past MRB data on previously manufactured or similar part characteristics, and identification of features that interface, interact, and assemble with other mating parts. The Pfmea tool was also used to brainstorm with the CFT team for exploring new defect prevention and detection controls. Next slide, please. From the Pfmea, the control plans were prepared early in the development processes for all design characteristics. The emphasis is on implementing preventive control methods at the point of manufacture, like in-process probing, measurements at the in-process stages, tool life control, mistake proofing, etc. In addition, the objective is to verify the product at the earliest operation possible within the process before it reaches the final stages of the product. Further control methods like variable statistical process analysis and controls were also established at the in-process and final inspection stages, and reaction plans were automated for further investigations. Next slide, please. Some improvements that we have done and we are planning to implement in the measurement capability control are the development of templates to prepare the MSA plan and gauge R&R studies, the selection of characteristics that has to be mutually agreed between TASL and its customers for the MSA study, including product key characteristics, process key characteristics, critical major characteristics, etc. Incorporation of characteristics within the MSA plan which have past MRB issues and tighter tolerances. Selection of instruments based on factors like feature size, tolerance, and feature type with measurement capability charts that are mapped to these instruments. And the need for application of a type 1 gauge study is also being determined. where applicable, and the development of data collection methods for production process parts, for gauge R&R analysis, and continual improvements are also being developed. Next slide, please. Coming to external providers, some of the support activities planned and deployed at the suppliers are to standardize and simplify the supplier quality manual requirements based on the Table 1, Table 2, and Table 20 categorizations of the standard, conducting trainings to supplier cross-functional teams for deployment support, supporting the adoption of best practices both from TASL and its customers in identifying risks and challenges to proactively mitigate in-process manufacturing defects at the suppliers, conducting periodic reviews with suppliers to monitor their performance and improvements, and integrating the AS13100 requirements applicable based on the supplier scope to their internal audit system and as well as the surveillance audits from TASL. Next slide, please. The trainings were planned for both practitioners, leaders, and CFT teams, which is presented in this slide. The trainings focused on creating awareness and a proactive quality culture for the AS13100 and customer-specific requirements implementation. We have also utilized the syllabuses which are provided by the AESQ team on the core tools training. The standard and customer required and suggested trainings were also mapped and conducted using an internal training plan from the leadership to the end process end user. All the requirements have been identified. The trainings will also be monitored for their effectiveness through compliance reviews and refresher trainings later post deployment of the standard. Next slide, please. Some of the initiatives taken for the effective implementation of the standard are the development and incorporation of the AESQ templates and customer specified templates within the QMS. TASL templates were also being developed for some APQP elements like MSA plan, production capacity plan, and production preparation plan, which we have also implemented. The implementation of the APQP software with resource planning, automated predefined workflows, notifications, and status reporting that is underway. We are also working on an initiative to interlink the APQP core tools within the softwares with each other so that communication happens to and fro, and it also reduces the human effort and duplication of the processes. Next slide, please. Some of the potential benefits that are expected through the effective implementation of the AS13100 requirements are improvements in both internal and external process communication, improvements in knowledge management, throughput, and productivity, proactive early detection and mitigation of quality problems before they are identified with error-proofing product and process designs, adoption of industry best practices both at TASL and from customers for continual improvements based on monitoring of process performance, capability, and maturity. Next slide, please. Some of the lessons learned and best practices that can benefit us through the deployment of AS13100 standard are early engagement of leadership and customers for supporting the transition activities through periodic reviews, integration of APQP and program management gated process, promoting CFT involvement for compliance and improvements to the product development process, standardizing the industry baseline requirements for suppliers helps us in meeting the basic aero engine OEM requirements, which will help us as suppliers to qualify for aero engine OEM audits. Adoption of customer and industry best practice templates for improvement of the current QMS system. And last but not least, enhanced right first time, on-time delivery, and on-quality delivery confidence to the suppliers for development of new products, realization, and acceptance processes. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the projected status for the transition plan with the phase-wise focus on meeting the AESQ timeline. I thank the Tata Advanced Systems leadership and GE India and global sourcing teams for providing this wonderful opportunity to present our experiences and lessons learned. I once again thank the AESQ team on behalf of Tata Advanced Systems for providing this great opportunity I now hand over the presentation to Mr. Jun Sakai from IHI Corporation to speak about how we can get involved in AESQ. Thank you.
Thank you, Mani-san. It's a very impressive presentation. I'm Jun Sakai from IHI Corporation in Japan, and thank you for joining AESQ Supplier Forum for Asia Pacific region. In this session, I'd like to show you how to get involved in all the activities in AESQ. Next slide. Okay, this chart illustrates overview of AESQ activities, a relation with OEM supply chain and the timeline for AS13100 implementation. Since AS13100 has been published in March last year, time flies, and we have already passed halfway point of the timeline for the implementation. So it is not surprising many of you should be working on gap assessment and the requirement flow down to your QMS. But at the same time, there should be many issues or roadblocks came to the surface and maybe struggling to work out. So there will be useful activities in AESQ, such as communication, training, or deployment. But to involve in these activities, it can be started with a quite simple step. Please go to next page. So the very simple first step is please try to get into AESQ homepage and click Get Involved menu under the Membership tab. Next slide. And when you enter the Get Involved page, you can find the different options, such as AESQ Newsletter or AESQ member, or one can join SAE G20 to Standard Writing Committee. But in addition, there is a list of community of practice in the pink dotted line, which will take you directly to each LinkedIn group. So please check on that link. And with that, I'd like to put out one poll question to everyone. Next slide. The question is, have you already joined LinkedIn for any of the community of practice? And please answer with yes or no. Actually, I answered by myself. Okay, maybe we can go back to the result later, and to be conscious with the time, please go to the next slide. So this is a community of practice, and in the top left box, you can see the number of members in each community of practice. And this number is growing at this moment. So once you join in the group, you can post your communication to AESQ subject matter interest group, and they will respond to you with answer. And this kind of communication will energize the activity for the whole group. Do you think we have a response now?
Here's the result.
Okay. Well, maybe we may have more response, but it looks like many has no, not yet joined. So I can see there is some great opportunities. Okay, please go to next slide. So this is about the AESQ newsletter. You can sign up online to receive the newsletter. On the next slide. And this is about becoming AESQ member. Also, you can apply online. Next slide. And also, there is a subject matter interest group page. And you can have activities such as webinar, even the past ones with the video recording in this page. And the next slide. And also, finally, there's additional information you can get in these pages. And you can try different menu tab in AESQ homepage to get a lot of different information. Okay, that's all I have today. And I'd like to turn back to Jim Wilson-san, Senior Manager of Supplier Quality Development in Pratt & Whitney, Canada, for Q&A session.
Thank you, Jun-san. Well, we've gotten to the end of our presentations. I have been actively answering some questions online because I knew we were getting short on time for this. So anybody that hasn't been monitoring the chat, please go in there. There have been a number of good questions. And where those questions were straightforward answers, I've gone ahead and asked them already. So all of our presenters are available to answer some of these questions. So I'm going to throw them out there without assigning them to someone specific, because again, I don't know who's still awake and who's not. It's still very early here. But there's a question from Tomasz. When approved against AS13100 by one of the customers, one of the members, will the other members recognize that approval? Anybody want to jump in on that? Because I am chatty enough to do it myself. All right, Tomasz, the answer to that question is we'd love to. We'd love to be able to have GE do a 13100 audit at your facility and then accept it at Pratt & Whitney. But we're not quite there yet. We've been working very well together. And we've been very collaborative in putting all of these documents together. But at some point, we do have to look out for our own interests. What the RM 13005 team, the team that's responsible for internal audits, put together is the closest thing we could get to that. If you see 13100, you'll see a section that says that suppliers are required to do an annual audit report. That is a high-level audit report of all of the audit activity that's happened at your company during a year. So that would be customer audits, CB audits, it would be NADCAP audits, regulatory audits. All of those audits will be summarized in a single document, and there's a template for that on the recommended materials pages. That would hopefully, if let's say GE did that 13100 audit last year, and this year I'm thinking of doing one for Pratt & Whitney, by providing that annual audit report, just detailing that a customer did a 13100 audit, these were the findings and these were the corrective actions. By providing that simple information without letting me know who the customer was or specifically what was wrong with whatever part number, et cetera, maybe given a good on-time delivery and excellent quality, one of the OEMs might decide not to come in and on-site audit. They might do a mail-in audit, or they might just skip the audit altogether. That was the hope of the annual audit report. So without a certification for AS13100, and there are no plans to have it certified like AS9100, without that certification done by third parties, we are going to have to continue to do a little bit of our own auditing as we move forward over the next couple of years. It's not going to be January 2nd where I think all of the members start auditing suppliers to make sure that they're compliant. Does anybody else want to add to that? Okay. A question from Steve. Steve says, I'm sure it's been asked before, and yes, Steve, it has. But why has only 50% alignment been agreed across the AESQ? This only results in the supply chain being continued to be asked to comply with multiple customer requirements in addition to the industry standards. And he's talking about a slide that Earl presented where we said that we were able to knock down 50% of the the overall requirements. Steve, the real answer there is the requirements may not have been reduced as much as we would have liked, but they've been aligned much more. So not only have we been able to reduce it by 50%, the document retention requirements of ASQR and the document retention requirements of Sabre and the document retention requirements of S1000 were all different in the past. And you as a supplier to all those customers would have to have 4 different document retention schedules, possibly because they were all different. Yes, there's still a document retention requirement in AS13100, but it's one requirement for all of us. And that's, you know, yes, we didn't remove that requirement. There's still a need because AS9100 doesn't specify anything. There is a need for something that specifies document retention periods, but now it's one. And you as a supplier to all of those customers only has one requirement that you need to meet rather than maybe 2, 3, or 3.75, which is the average, right? So, you know, the number of requirements may not be indicative of exactly how much AS13100 is going to help, because we're able to move stuff from our company specific requirements into an agreed standard for all of us. So, I mean, I can continue just from a Pratt and Whitney specific point of view. Our current ASQR1 document is 17 pages. Rev 11 is 17 pages. The current draft that's out for ballot right now is probably down to 6. So, you know, a lot of those have gone into 13,100. Yes, they haven't been eliminated, but they've been agreed with the other OEMs, and now there's only one second. And a good portion of those 6 pages are, you know, use our form this, go to our website there, use our form here. So it's not a whole lot of additional stuff.
It is Khan, sorry, just to reinforce that, you know, same with Sabre 4, there is only a handful of things in Sabre 4 that are over and above AS13100. So I think we've all tried to do our best to keep that as the core of what's necessary.
Okay, from Ang, some of the members' quality requirements have not been updated with the new 13,100. As us at Pratt Whitney. With this, there seems to be a mismatch in the timeline with AESQ, giving suppliers little time to respond. And there was a second question asking if there would be extensions past the January 1st deadline. Does somebody want to take this? Again, I can talk about Pratt, but
I guess from a Rolls-Royce point of view, Sabre 4 went out in August. So, you know, our expectation is that if you supply to us, that you will be compliant. I can't speak for the others, and I'm sure, Jim, you'll speak for Pratt, but even if it isn't formally out, I think the messaging is that we have signaled compliance. You guys have for many a month.
And I'll speak for Pratt specifically, knowing what's in the current draft of Rev 12. And basically our communication, and I think Earl talked about it before, we've done 10 sessions with our Pratt and Whitney suppliers so far. The message we're giving them is that, look, if you're compliant today to our ASQR1 Rev 11, and you're doing your self-evaluation to be compliant to AS13100, whatever is going to be left in ASQR Rev 12 will not be any additional things. It might keep some things as they are today in Rev 11, but it will not be adding anything new out of the blue kind of thing. So if you're compliant today to ASQR1 Rev 11, and you're figuring out how to be compliant to AS13100, your job is basically done. And there will be no major surprises. I don't think any surprises, but let's say no major surprises when Rev 12 is published, hopefully by the end of May for us and for the other members to get theirs out as well. Okay, I see some good questions coming in. Let me see. We are running out of time. Okay, this is a question that maybe one of the other AESQ members could, from Jocelyn, on the point regarding the radiograph scanning of the raw material, so 85141, in case anybody wants to look it up. There are exceptions regarding parts with unique identifiers, either a serial number or lot number. We have interpreted this requirement as not applicable for us, as all materials have a unique serialization or batch number. Is that correct? It's a question we haven't had too many times before. And I think the answer is ask your customer specifically. That's usually the answer to most of these questions, but I think you're interpreting it right. The reason for these handheld spectrometry tests, the reason that we put it in there, that the groups agreed to it, not so much about the material itself, which usually come in with, you know, metallurgical reports, or you send samples out for metallurgical analysis. it's about when the part is actually released to the floor. So if you read the requirement, it's actually on a release to the floor basis that you need to do the scan. It's a last minute insurance that even though you have the right materials in stock, the person that's pulling that particular batch of material for that particular manufacturing batch is in fact pulling the right material. And it wasn't accidentally mismatched once it was cut into pieces, for example, and put back into stores. So, you know, while it may technically be an exemption, as long as you can prove, and if I was auditing you to this point, as long as you can prove that you have an adequate and robust system for remarking pieces that have been put back into stores, that they're properly identified, that the people that are pulling them are properly trained in how to identify them, yes, it's probably an exception. But if none of that is really true, then it's probably something that is not a bad idea. All right, I think there's one more. No, that was, oh, there it is. Okay. So that was Lier. PPR was answered. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that have been submitted recently. Who will be in charge of the control of AS 13100 conformance? Okay, Fabien, I think we talked about it a little bit. There's each customer is still going to want to rely on their own, being convinced that that you are compliant. The annual audit report is going to be a key factor for that. It is a little bit of work, but if you can hand it to your 6 customers and say, look, this is all we did. Do you really need to come in and redo? You know, Rolls-Royce came in and did 13,100, and Pratt Whitney came in and did the 13,100. Hey, GE, do you really think you need to come in, or is there just a couple of questions you can ask on the remaining AS1000 requirements, something like that? So there's nobody in control, but it'll be on a customer by customer basis for now, until we can figure out a better way. We're out of time. Okay, the last 2 questions.
And we'll have to answer those questions later on. We'll post them online for everyone. I'm going to pass it over to Uzam Khan from Rolls-Royce to do our summary and close.
Thank you, Jim. Nice that the Oscars music would have to come off the stage. So thank you for that. Guys, we're near the end. I do think this is a really pivotal year. The guys have worked for the last 8 years to come to this standard. We have the rest of the year to implement it, a journey that you guys have been on for many years. So, and we hope that this is a collaboration, not an imposition. Certainly, I joined the AESQ family just a year ago, and I do feel there's a real collaborative spirit. So, let's make that the same for everybody. Over the last 2-3 hours, you've heard great stories of progress and examples of good practice. And we want you to continue to connect that. So this video of all of this will be available shortly through Becky, including the Q&A and the questions we haven't completed and the presentations, and we'll send out a survey. So this is online as well as a lot of other stuff that you can access freely in AESQ, and we really encourage you to do that. And I guess lastly, it's a big thank you. Thank you, Becky, for organizing all of this, for all of the speakers, not just for presenting and for putting the material together, but the fact that you're able to do it means you've been on this journey for many years. So thank you for that. And finally, and mostly, thank you to everybody who's persevered from early mornings to late nights, etc., to attend this. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to the next time that we can be with you again. Thank you, everybody.
Well done, Becky.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.